and welcome to the Everyday Editor. My name is John Crossman, and thanks for watching. Today we're going to finish our discussion about the video production cycle or process by talking about post-production. Now, I have spent the vast majority of my career in post-production. I started in this business editing news at a local TV station, and that led me further onward and upward over the years to where I've edited all kinds of programs, from documentaries that have been on national television, sporting shows, events, weddings, funerals, all kinds of different things. And what we're going to talk about today is editing. And I feel that a lot of people, even though they may be familiar with the concept and the term, they don't really understand what it means. And that's not hard to believe, because unless you do it, it can be hard to explain. And as I may have said earlier, what's kind of surprising to me is many of the people that I've worked with over the years really don't like editing. I mean, they love to write a story, they love to go out in the field and shoot footage, but they don't want to sit in a chair and then decide what to use and what not to use and actually put it all together. So this is going to be kind of a brief overview, like the other podcasts have been on this, but my hope is that, as we go further down the road with these podcasts, when I mention pre-production or production or post-production, you'll have at least a good basic understanding of what I'm talking about and why it's important. So, post-production editing is decision making. That's the simplest way I think I've been able to define it, and that may be a reason why a lot of people aren't comfortable with it, because it is non-stop choosing, non-stop decision making. Do I use this shot? Do I use that shot? Which shot do I use first? Which one do I use second? How does the third and the first shot, relate to each other? There's lots of ways you can get lost when it comes to editing, and I have to say that from the very first time I sat down and edited something, I absolutely loved it, and that's why I've done it for most of my career. I loved editing in news. For one thing, at 6 o'clock when the news aired, you were done. And editing in production like I do now for professional video, corporates and events and whatnot, is that it honestly seems like some projects never end. In news, I would edit. We would generally budget, an hour per finished minute. But it was not unusual at all to get the lead story for 6 o'clock and not be able to start editing it until 4:30 or 5, and it might be a 90-second piece, so I should have an hour and a half to edit, but I've really got less than an hour to do it. And in most cases, it was absolutely fine. Occasionally, you would get a story, or you'd get a certain reporter who just couldn't move that fast, and so that would delay you being able to do what you needed to do. Very often, these stories might be something going on in court, and at that time, cameras weren't allowed in the court, and so there would be courtroom artists that the station would hire, and their job, of course, was to sketch a half a dozen to, I don't think they ever did a dozen pictures, but probably between 6 and 10 images of, what was going on in the courtroom, whether that be someone testifying or the judge at the bench or whatever, and then the reporter who had been there all day would write their report. But all those artist drawings had to be shot. And even then, back in the early part of my career, I would plead with the shooters to do moves on the images, because static images are slides, and slides are boring. And if you could just do a little, push in or pull out or pan across the shot, that would add a visual interest. Now, in those days, the equipment that I had, I couldn't do a dissolve, so they would have to do a move. They would have to start static, do a move, and stop. Then I could cut in and out on the static parts of, before and after the move. And there's a reason for that, which I'll talk about as we get into editing rules in later podcasts. But editing is choices, it's decisions, and it's constant. And it's not only visual, it's also audio. And in the case of the kind of production editing that I do, it can be audio, video, it'll be music, it'll be animation. How long do you need things to last? What do you need to show? How's the best way to show it? All kinds of things that really comes down to the editor, at least in my case, to make those kind of decisions. And so that may be a reason why some people are uncomfortable with it. I've hired many editors and fired a couple editors, and sometimes they would just complain constantly about they didn't have the shots they needed. Well, we were all editing, from the same team with the same shooters, and so he may not have always had the shots he wished he had, but he always would have enough shots to tell the story because we had good videographers, and so he would act like it was a major disaster, and yet it wasn't. And that's really where you learn if you're going to be a good editor or not, when you can make something shine when you maybe don't have everything you wish you had. And that was a daily occurrence in news because it's always under a deadline, and it's rushed, and you don't have all the time in the field that the shooter might want to be able to get every single kind of possible shot. And so when you get back and you're looking at the footage, I would put the tape in the machine and go through it quickly, usually at real time, but might speed up here and there. And as I went through the tape, I go, well, there's a good establishing shot here, so these two shots will work well together. Here's a good shot. This is interesting. If the reporter talks about this kind of thing in the story, then this shot would be great. And that's where I came up. So I really enjoyed editing and still do to this day. Editing is storytelling, just like writing is storytelling and shooting is storytelling. The only difference is, as the editor, you are telling the final story. So you get to take the storytelling from those that have been involved with the project before you, and your job, in my opinion, as an editor, is to polish it and make the final story as best as it could possibly be, given what you've been given. And there are times when you may not be given, everything that you need. And for me, over the years, I have developed the ability through animation and graphics to sometimes be able to make up things to be able to cover the stuff that I don't have ready for me. Editing, I think, is very logical for the most part. If the story is about pink elephants and the writer writes about pink elephants and the videographer shot video of pink elephants, well, then the editor's going to show pink elephants. That's not too hard to understand. The place it starts to get tricky is what shot of the pink elephants is the editor going to choose. And at that point, you might have 20 to choose from. How do you decide which one is the one that you should start with? And that goes back to some of the storytelling conventions, which is the same for writing and shooting and for editing. And that is who, what, when, where, why, and how, the 5 W's and how. And most of the time you want to start with where. Where is this story taking place? You read any story, a short story, a novel, you watch any television show, even nighttime dramas and serials, almost always after a commercial break, the first shot will be an establishing shot, we call it, or a wide shot. I'm a huge fan of The West Wing and really anything Aaron Sorkin's ever written and created. So coming out of commercial, the first thing you'd see would be the White House if the next scene was going to be at the White House, or you'd see Congress if it was going to be dealing with Congress, or it would be the Supreme Court if it was going to be at the Supreme Court. And so as soon as you come out of commercial break, you see a shot of the White House, you know where you're going. And that's called an establishing shot, or in the technical term of the shot, it might be a wide shot, generally is a wide shot. I think that one of the critical factors of editing is that every shot I ever used that I've ever put in has been motivated. Now sometimes, that's a pretty lofty statement to say of the million shots I've edited in my career, everyone has been motivated. But I feel pretty confident in saying that, even though I understand totally that sometimes the motivation might be the best of two evils. It might be the only shot I've got, and so I have to use it, which isn't really motivated by anything other than the piece has to be done. I not only don't have the shot I wish I had, I really don't have a shot that I feel would tell the story in the best possible way, but I've got to put something in. I can't go to black for 4 or 5 seconds, so so that's my motivation for sometimes using a shot, is that it's the best of what I have, even though I don't really have a great shot. I was going to talk about an example from news, because I did learn in news, but really, and I feel even to this day, it's a tremendous training ground if you're interested in becoming a video editor. If there's any way you can get on at a TV station or even a production company, I got into editing through serendipity, and the industry at the time was just changing from film, and when local news stations would shoot stories on film, there might be one story a day shot on film, and the rest of the stories on the newscast were what you would call a reader, where there might be a graphic or a picture put up above the anchor, and they would just simply read copy, because film not only had to be shot, but it also had to be developed, and that was not a quick necessarily process. And once it was developed, then an editor would have to break the film down into the individual shots and have some kind of system to organize that, and then they'd get the script from the reporter, and then they would have to cut both an A roll and a B roll, which I'll get into when I talk about jargon in another podcast. But you've probably heard the term B roll. Well, B roll is what covers your A roll, basically, and A roll is what is your primary footage. So if you have the governor being interviewed about a water project, that would be your A roll. You see the governor on camera, they're talking to the reporter, they're speaking into a microphone, you can hear what they're saying, but then at a certain point you're going to cut to the water project that they're talking about. It could be bulldozers, it could be a dam, it could be blasting, it could be whatever footage that you have. That footage is B-roll. It's covering the A-roll. That's a brief explanation of A-roll and B-roll. The next major point I would want to make about editing is that as the editor, you serve the story first and foremost. And if you can serve the story, then you'll serve the producer, you'll serve your client, you'll serve the videographer that shot it, and you'll serve the audience. And so that goes back to the logic of how you choose the pictures or the images that you use to tell the story. The writer is going to have something in mind. The videographer, depending on what they know and how well they've been briefed, may or may not have an idea of what's going to be talked about. There's a couple of different kinds of production that I talked about, the seat of your pants, which many times news fell into, but if you go to cover a fire, the videographer knows I need to get an establishing shot. I need to get, fire engines and firemen, and, if there's families out on the street, I'll get a shot of that, and water coming out of the hose, I'll get a shot of that, and of course flames and smoke and whatnot. I'll walk around and get different shots and so on and so forth. So they're serving the story in the way that they're shooting it. The writer or the reporter's going to serve the story in the way that they write it. And then as it gets to you, the editor, your job is to take what they've given you and again serve the story, whether that's by making it, I always used to use the term seamless, in that most stories kind of have a beginning, a middle, and an end. So the beginning may start with, there was a fire on Adams Street this morning, and it ended up being a 3-alarm fire and such, and you're showing pictures. Now the reporter's going to change from talking about the fire in general terms to maybe talking specifically about the challenges of fighting this particular fire. As the editor, I would probably look for a shot that related to where the producer, the reporter, was going to next. So maybe that's hoses being hooked to a hydrant, or a hydrant being turned on, or a firefighter scooting up the ladder or raising the bucket on the fire truck. I would look for something that had some natural sound to it, meaning sound that went with the image, and use that as just a brief breath between the last part of what the reporter said and the next part of what the reporter's going to say. And so the overall effect of that is not that it would be jarring to talk about the fire and where it was and how it got started, and then go talk about, and the firefighters, went up the ladders as quick as they could. I mean, that's not jarring in and of itself, but having that little breath gives the viewer a chance to go, okay, this is where the fire was, and now I'm ready for the next part, which is, how the firefighters fought it. And so I would feel those breaths and put them into the story so that it was easier for the viewer. You get so much information, and then you'd get a change of focus through usually a piece of nat sound. And that worked not only for a fire story, but it worked for any kind of story, really. Whether I was editing sports or I was editing, daily news, I would use that convention of natural sound often, and still do use it in a lot of the stories that I edit to this day. This day, depending on if I'm doing something that's historical, I'm going to have photographs, and they're not going to have natural sound. So I might use music to change the pace, to refresh the visual and audio palette of the viewer.
And as far as I'm concerned, this label is not a problem. It's an opportunity. It's an opportunity for us to begin to do the work that we have not to this day been doing. Semester grades, high school. Did you get a chance to look at those?
No, I haven't had a chance to look at those yet.
And so rather than pointing fingers, we were able to begin to establish lines of communication, to build trust, to really focus on reshaping our organizational culture.
Trying to change our culture to where it's sort of
the music changed, something different. We're going to go to now their high school career or their college career or their pro career, and it's just a triggering mechanism to reestablish the concentration and the focus of the viewer. So a handy tip, if you can realize that when you see it, and put that into your editing quiver of tools. The last thing with post-production would be getting the files ready for delivery. Now, today with nonlinear editing, that would mean doing a final render out and rendering it out to a format, probably a YouTube or a Vimeo format that you can share online, or if you're going to do broadcast, the show that I have on Prime, they have a specific set of codecs and technical specs that they want the show to be at. And so, as the editor, I make sure that I am outputting to their specifications. If the client wants something on a DVD, and yes, they still do exist, people still do use them, then that's yet a different codec altogether. And it used to be great with Final Cut Studio. They had not only a great editing program, but they also had a DVD mastering program called DVD Studio. And I used it and did hundreds of DVDs for clients. And it was really a powerful program. Apple had actually bought it from another company and put it in their suite. But it was really a good program. And now there is no program. Now you have to go to some third-party app, and most of those are designed to say you want your son or daughter's birthday on a DVD. You just literally slap a clip on and it puts it on a DVD. A real DVD has a menu, it has chapters, it has at least some features on it. The DVD spec, as well as the Blu-ray, has a tremendous amount of interactivity that you can build into it. Nobody does, because when they first came out and they first tried doing that, it is much more time intensive and laborious, so it costs much more money to make a DVD or Blu-ray interactive. And they found out that people didn't use them. They didn't use the interactive features. Even your basic Blu-ray now, has different kinds of menus, and I couldn't tell you what the difference is between them. But they're there on the remote, the top menu, or I think there's one just called Menu, and half the time with a Blu-ray, one button works, takes you somewhere, and one button doesn't. So they don't even use the bare minimum of what is involved in the spec. So, but it takes a different kind of codec and a different kind of render out if you're going to go to a DVD or Blu-ray. So that's the last part of post-production, is the delivery. And for years, I would edit on a master tape, which would be my editing tape, and then I would make a copy that had the audio mixed onto a duplication master, and then I would make copies on VHS off of that. When DVDs first started coming in, I actually had a hard-wired rack-mounted DVD encoder, so I could send a digital video signal off my Digibeta master directly into that box, and it would generate in real time an MPEG-2 file that I could then use DVD Studio Pro to make a DVD out of. And I did that hundreds and hundreds of times for clients and different things. So that's the last part of post-production. Over the course of these podcasts, we'll of course get into more details and more nitty-gritty behind editing, as well as production and pre-production. But hopefully that gives you a good idea of what's involved in post-production. My name is John Crossman. I appreciate you watching. Click subscribe or leave a comment if you have a question, and we'll see you on the editing room floor.